Do you remember the orange roof? If you grew up in America between 1955 and 1980, you saw it from the back seat of a car. A particular shade of burnt orange on a white building, appearing at the side of a highway like a signal from a civilization that understood what you needed right now. Inside, 28 flavors of ice cream. A fried clam strip, a grilled frankfurter and a toasted bun, the most recognizable roadside brand in the country that invented roadside brands. At its peak, Howard Johnson's operated more restaurants than McDonald's and Burger King combined. For a period in the 1960s, it was widely regarded as the largest restaurant chain in the United States. A company that did not just feed America, it lined the roads America drove on and became part of the physical grammar of what a family vacation felt like. By the early 2020s, only one Howard Johnson's restaurant remained in Lake George, New York. In 2022, that final location closed, bringing the restaurant chain's nearly century-long run to an end. One out of almost 1,000. This is not a story about food. It is a story about what happens when a company builds itself perfectly for one world, and then that world ends. The man who built it was born in 1897 in Wollaston, Massachusetts, the son of a cigar manufacturer and wholesaler. Howard Deering Johnson left school at 15, worked in his father's business, watched it fail, inherited its debts, and in 1925 took over a small patent medicine and newspaper stand in Wollaston with $500 borrowed against what little remained. He was not a chef, at least not in the traditional sense. He was a man trying to pay off $28,000 in inherited debt who noticed that the drugstore soda fountain next door was doing a roaring trade in ice cream. He began making his own, using a richer butterfat content than anyone else in the area, and selling it from the stand. By the summer of 1928, he had added a beach concession stand. The ice cream sold faster than he could make it. What Johnson understood before almost anyone else in the American food business was the specific anxiety of the American road. A family in a car in 1935 crossing an unfamiliar state had no reliable way of knowing if the diner ahead of them was going to be clean or safe or serve food the children would eat. Every unfamiliar restaurant was a small act of faith. Johnson's insight was to make the building itself the guarantee. The orange roof, the cupola on top, the particular shade of turquoise on the sign. You had seen it before. You knew what was inside. You did not need faith. You just pulled in. He called this the host of the highways. It was not a slogan. It was an operating philosophy. By 1935, Johnson had begun franchising, licensing the name, the recipes, the orange roof, and the turquoise sign to independent operators trained to a single standard. It became one of the first large-scale restaurant franchise systems in American history, helping define the model that countless chains would later follow. McDonald's would not franchise until 1953. Ray Kroc would not join them until 1954. Johnson had been doing it for almost 20 years before either of them arrived. By 1940, there were 130 Howard Johnson's restaurants operating along the eastern seaboard. Then the war came and the highway dried up. Gasoline rationing meant nobody was driving anywhere that wasn't essential. Johnson survived by converting his locations to canteens, feeding factory workers and soldiers, keeping the lights on and the ovens running until the roads filled up again. When they did fill up, the timing was perfect. The Interstate Highway Act of 1956 launched one of the largest infrastructure projects in American history. Over the following decades, more than 40,000 miles of interstate highways would reshape how Americans traveled. Every mile of new road was a new stretch of hungry travelers with somewhere new to stop. And there, at the interchange, was the orange roof. To understand what Howard Johnson's felt like in 1962, you have to put yourself in the car. You have been driving since before breakfast. The children in the back seat have been asking for an hour. Your wife has the map open on her lap. And then over a rise in the road, the roof appears, orange against a pale summer sky, and everyone in the car knows what happens next. You push through the glass door and the cold air hits you. Machine-cooled and clean-smelling, a pretty hostess in a uniform the color of the sign leads you to a booth with vinyl seats. The menu is laminated. The clam strips are battered light and fried crisp. The macaroni and cheese comes in a small cast-iron dish. And at the end of the meal, the ice cream counter runs the full length of the restaurant. 28 flavors listed on a board above it, and a child is allowed to choose. Peach, coconut, banana, black raspberry, frozen pudding, macaroon, peppermint stick. Flavors that required a board because they would not fit in your head. Johnson had commissioned an MIT graduate to develop a stabilization process that kept ice cream consistent in texture across hundreds of kitchens. He had spent real money solving a problem no competitor had bothered to define yet. The ice cream was not incidentally good. It was engineered to be exactly the same in Maine as it was in Florida. In 1965, Howard Johnson's had 770 restaurants and $323 million in sales. McDonald's had 710 restaurants and $171 million. At that moment, Howard Johnson's was still the larger company, a fact that is often forgotten today. I had to go back and verify that number. It does not match the story you think you know. Howard Deering Johnson died in 1972. He was 75, and he had already handed the company to his son, Howard Bredding Johnson Jr., 7 years earlier. He died having built one of the most successful restaurant chains in the world, and his name was still on every single one of them. His son was known as Hojo Jr., a detail that tells you something. He had not built the company. He had inherited it at 26. He was intelligent and well-intentioned, but he was running an institution his father had assembled across 4 decades of personal instinct, and he was doing it at the precise moment when the ground was moving underneath it. The interstate that had built Howard Johnson's was now working against it. In the early 1970s, new highway interchanges were going up faster than leases could be negotiated. McDonald's and Burger King were not competing for the same traveler. They were intercepting him earlier, at a lower price point before he reached the Hojo on the other side of the interchange. The counter-service economics that had destroyed Wimpy and Britain were playing out identically on the American highway, and then in 1973, the oil crisis arrived. Gasoline lines, rationing. A country that had organized its entire leisure economy around the car suddenly told to stop driving. Howard Johnson's revenues fell off a cliff. The oil crisis hit Howard Johnson's hard, but it arrived just as fast food chains, changing travel habits, and growing competition were already beginning to erode the advantages that had made the company dominant. Hojo Jr.'s response was to diversify. Hotels had been part of the operation since 1954, and the logic of expanding them was coherent. Travelers needed beds as well as meals, but the hotel expansion required capital that the restaurant division was no longer reliably generating. The two halves of the business began pulling against each other. In 1979, he sold. The buyer was Imperial Group, a British tobacco and food conglomerate. The orange roof passed out of the Johnson family entirely. Imperial Group was not a foolish buyer. It inherited a company whose business model was already under pressure from forces that had been building for years. What Imperial purchased was not only real estate and recipes. It was a system of meaning. The orange roof meant something specific to a specific generation of Americans, and that meaning was not written down anywhere in the due diligence. It lived in the back seats of a million cars that no longer existed, in the memory of a particular cold blast of air-conditioned restaurant on a hot August afternoon, in a child's face in front of 28 flavors. Imperial saw locations, lease terms, and a hotel division with significant asset value. They cut costs. They reduced the menu. They updated the interiors in ways that were defensible on paper and fatal in practice. The orange roofs began to go. The particular shade that had been Johnson's signature, the color so distinctive it had worked as a billboard from a quarter mile away, was softened, modernized, made to look less like 1955. Each change was rational from a business perspective. Critics later argued that taken together, they weakened some of the brand's most recognizable qualities. In 1985, Imperial sold to Marriott. Marriott was interested in the hotels, which it absorbed into its own portfolio. The restaurants were an afterthought, passed to a series of investment firms across the late 1980s who extracted what value remained and closed what didn't produce. By 1990, there were fewer than 200 locations. By 2000, fewer than 100. By 2022, 1. Howard Johnson's was not beaten by McDonald's. Its decline cannot be explained by a single cause. Industry historians generally point to changing travel habits, the rise of fast food, increasing competition, and a series of ownership transitions that struggled to keep the brand relevant. The final restaurant operated in Lake George, New York before closing in 2022. Franchise owner John Koff has run it for decades. The orange roof is still there. The fried clams are still on the menu. On a summer weekend, the parking lot fills with people who drove past these places as children and want to show someone what it was. The ice cream counter still has more flavors than you expect. It does not require nostalgia to explain why it still works. It requires understanding what it always was. A clean room with good food and a recognizable sign on a road full of strangers. That need did not go away. The infrastructure to meet it did. There is a lesson here that is not really about restaurants. Howard Johnson's built the first franchise system in American history. It was larger than McDonald's at McDonald's peak growth. It survived a world war and a gasoline crisis. It held a brand so recognizable that the color of its roof worked as advertising from a moving vehicle at highway speed. And then it passed to owners who saw the locations and missed the meaning, who optimized the costs and erased the thing the costs had been building. Imperial didn't destroy Howard Johnson's through malice or incompetence. It destroyed it by treating a feeling like a balance sheet line. The orange roof is still there in Lake George if you want to find it. One franchise holding on in a parking lot that fills up every summer with people who remember what it felt like to see that color from the backseat of a car and know that everything was going to be all right. We did not lose Howard Johnson's for one reason alone. The chain faced changing travel habits, the rise of fast food, increased competition, and a succession of owners who struggled to preserve what had once made the brand special.